Did you ever sit back and wonder whether the different personality types affected ADHD in their own unique and different ways? Well, I'm here to tell you absolutely so. Absolutely, absolutely. Absolutely, absolutely. Yes. The different personality types and their characteristics and cognitive functions that come within personality types greatly affect the way people deal with issues that come with ADHD. On top of that, you have your nature and nurture factors and the uniqueness that comes with a person's unique upbringing, the type of individuals involved in that person's upbringing, and the surrounding environment. And before we jump into this, I just want to state that there is much more variety than is thought when it comes to these cognitive functions of the different personality types. There are subsets upon even more subsets. The letters vary greatly in ratio. And I just want to give a heads up that this video is particularly about ADHD and the personality types and how the individual can act when they're not feeling good and how to kind of spot it within yourself or how to spot it within a friend or family member so you can help them out and you can keep things smooth if you catch the drift. So stuff doesn't go awry, doesn't go out of whack, and people don't have a meltdown and life is good. Which can be a little tough when the ADHD comes a knocking, especially when you're not having a good day. Whether it be because of not eating, not sleeping right, someone really upset you because of RSD. And speaking of RSD, yes, this will have a lot to do with this video as well. Rejection sensitivity dysphoria. I have a whole long video on that. Link in the description below. So, yes, there are many variants. Some personality types are much more common here in the US. Some types are much more common in different parts of the world. And some types are really rare in some places and not so rare in others. Isn't the beauty of variety beautiful? Yes. So, let's go over a couple letters before we jump into the fun and the hootenanny. We have the different letters. We have the 8 different letters out of the 16 personality types, which does not mean that there only exist 16 personality types. There are subvariants among subvariants ad nauseum. You can keep going. You have a certain personality type with these 4-letter combinations, and they meet somebody else of that same personality type. They can be completely different people. Why? Because ratios of the letters, of how strong some of the letters are, with the characteristics that they bring, can be completely different than the other person. Why? Because our lives are lived uniquely. So, going first. In the first slot of the 4 letters here, when it comes to the personality types, we have the E's or the I's. Now, the E stands for extroverts. Extroverts are energized by people, enjoy a variety of tasks, a quick pace, and are good at multitasking. So, extroverts, lively people, like to be around other people, feel good, want to be by themselves, tendency to get bored a little bit perhaps, but don't get me wrong, some extroverts need their time alone. Some extroverts need quite a bit of time alone, but generally speaking, extroverts like to be around people, like a quick pace, multitasking, being around other people, pumps you up, good time, do the do. Introverts, on the other hand, introverts often like working alone or in small groups, prefer a more deliberate pace, and like to focus on one task at a time. Introverts like being in their own world a lot of the time, doing stuff the way they like to internalize it. Sometimes working with too many people can be, it can be a little stressful. We can get bored, we can get irritated, annoyed, saddened, fill in the blank. So we prefer to work by ourselves a good amount of time, which does not mean that introverts are all, I want to be alone all the time. No, absolutely not. There are millions, tons, thousands, whatever number you want to say, many introverts who like to be around a lot of people, like to have a good time, and can actually be quite extroverted. It depends. It really depends on the person's upbringing and the details that entails. So that is for the first slot. You will either be an E for an extrovert or an I for an introvert. For the second letter, we have the sensing types and we have the intuitives. So that S stands for sensing, sensors. Sensors, or sensing types, are realistic people who like to focus on the facts and details. They apply common sense and past experience to find practical solutions to problems. Now, sensing people are really in the outside world, meaning that facts and figures of what's been done and kind of how it's always been done is kind of their thing. Not the most abstract thinkers that are intuitive and think deep within, rationalize new ideas. What if we did it like this? Not exactly sensor territory. Sensing people are really good at knowing the outside world and what that entails. Not to say that a sensing type is not intuitive. Absolutely not. I have many friends who are sensing types who are quite intuitive and very in their thoughts. But there's also quite a bit of people who are sensing types who are very much, it ain't Christmas if there ain't no snow, and you cannot change their mind. Those are the people who need certain requirements for them to consider something. So then you have the intuitives. N in this case. Intuitives prefer to focus on possibilities and the big picture, easily see patterns, value innovation, see creative solutions to problems. So here's where the differences between intuitives and sensors comes in. Listen, just the definition alone is very different. Intuitives prefer on focusing on the big possibilities and the big picture, easily see patterns, value innovation. Value innovation. Here is where there's a contrast. Intuitives like working on ideas and things and doing it in ways that have not been done before necessarily. And that could be scary to a sensing type who's like, it's always been done like this, so why the hell would we do it any different? Because of progress, because of wanting to innovate. So, yes, that could be an issue. Especially when an intuitive sees a different way of doing something and then they're not seen or taken seriously, especially if they're working in a sensing environment where a majority of people are sensing types. Or just like the other way around, when you have a sensing type who knows what's going to happen in a situation more concretely, and you have intuitives who have never done it thinking that something's going to happen a certain way, and the sensing type's like, no. If we do that, this is going to, explode or something bad's going to happen. So it really depends on the nature of it. And I'm going to get into it in more detail later on. So, and here's where we have a giant contrast in this country. We have the thinkers and then we have the feelers, i.e. we have the T's, the logical types, and F, the feeling types. So this is for the third letter, and one of the biggest contrasts within the personality types. We have thinkers. Thinkers tend to make their decisions using logical analysis, objectively weigh pros and cons, and value honesty, consistency, and fairness. So to a thinking type, logic seems to be the go-to when it comes to making decisions. And a value of fairness. If something occurs, usually logical types, if something happens, they cannot get angry with something, or they don't get angry with something if it's not realistic or logical. There's not much of a concern to logically concern yourself with something that is not logically realistic or possible to happen. A lot of logic in logical types, which can also be difficult as well, because logic is not the only thing you have to use when making a decision. Sometimes we have to understand the emotions and the feelings behind some of the people that we're working with and why they do what they do. So a balance is definitely needed. We have now the feeling types, which would be the other letter in the scenario, which we would term these the feelers. Feelers tend to be sensitive and cooperative and decide based on their own personal values and how others will be affected by their actions. Notice how there's much more of a camaraderie vibe amongst feelers. They tend to be sensitive and cooperative and decide based on their own personal values. Key phrases there. Own personal values. And how others will be affected by their actions. Here's where a logical type is, okay, does that really matter? Do other people's feelings in this scenario matter? And that could be a sense of a lot of conflict, because sometimes a decision needs to be made where there's going to be a certain group of people, a certain person, a large group of people, whatever number it may be, that might not like what's going to happen. But for the better of the business, of the situation, of the overall circumstance, some things need to happen. And sometimes that disrupts the harmony of what's going on. So it's the means of how to approach that, how to find that balance. That's why in certain situations, there's always going to be a group of people, or one person, or a few people, however many, that is not going to like the outcome, and there's going to be the opposite group that's going to like the outcome. So we have that amongst the thinkers and the feelers. Then we have the judgers, and then we have the perceivers. This last letter group, the J's or the P's, is essentially the motor of the personality types. This is what's the biggest driver in terms of how you're going to conduct yourself to an extent. And it's really important. When you study cognitive functions, you're going to see what I mean. Let's start with the J's, the judgers. Judgers tend to be organized and prepared, like to make and stick to plans, and are comfortable following most rules. So J's, they're going to know what they're going to be doing, especially if they're pretty strict with themselves. They're going to know what they're going to be doing next week at 5 o'clock on Tuesday. They're going to exaggeratedly plan when they're going to use the restroom. And they like making schedules and like sticking to them. Not really good at improvising sometimes because of that. Not really good at improvising. Sometimes they don't like changing plans. They like making a plan. They have an idealization sometimes of the way stuff should be. And there's going to be a problem with that person either internally or outwardly, depending on the rest of the personality type characteristics. So, overall, judgers like to plan, be organized, stick to plans, and have an idealization of how certain situations should be. Then we have the other letters. P, for perceivers. Perceivers prefer to keep their options open. They like to be able to act spontaneously and like to be flexible when making plans. Usually people who are perceivers are quite good at improvising. They like doing something when the elements or the circumstance kind of feels best to do. Because you cannot plan. Sometimes you cannot plan to do something grand and grandiose. Sometimes the elements involved require you to wait so you can figure out more information. So perceivers usually can be pretty quick on their feet. They don't mind changing plans. They like being spontaneous with them. If the plans change, they can change with those plans within seconds, within minutes, however long and however disciplined they are. But they can improvise quite well, and if something needs to change, a game plan needs to change, a scenario needs to change, they'll figure out what they need to do pretty quick. That's a skill that they both have. They can figure stuff out pretty quick because of this, and it helps them improvise and do what they got to do. Just like the judgers, the J's, they're really good at creating their schedule and sticking to it. And they can be quite excellent in that sort of way. The key here is balance. Now, I've spoken about these letters in a very idealistic way. Unfortunately, our folks don't always bring us up in the most ideal way, and neither do instructors, and neither does life for that matter. So some of these letters in some individuals can be quite strong and can be a little overbearing. And sometimes some of these letters can be so weak and so untrained that there's going to be quite a bit of problems. You can have someone, for instance, who's such a critical, unbalanced J that wants stuff done exactly how they planned it, that they're going to throw a fit unless something is done like that. Or you have a perceiver who has such a flexibility with schedules that they never stick to plans. They make plans with a family member or friend, and they just keep flaking on them over and over again. That's just a good example of that. I can give you many, many examples for each of the letters, but I'm not, because we're going to jump into the different personality types now. Now you got an idea of what the different letters represent. So if you want to take this test before we dive into the personality types to see what personality type you are as the listener, I left a link yet again down below that you can see. Okay? The Myers-Briggs exam. It's going to take you roughly, I don't know, I would say maybe 20 plus minutes. And if you take the test, I recommend you take it twice and you give answers that are honest, really honest, not your ideal version of yourself, but how you really are and how you really act and what you really believe with those questions. Don't try to sound amazing. Don't try to sound bad. Be as honest as you can and take the test twice so you can have a pretty concrete idea of what personality type you might be. Okay? The more honest you are, the better the results, the more this video will help you out. So I'll be waiting right here until you get back. Alright, now that you took your test and you came back and you know what personality type you are, and you've read a little bit about it maybe, let's dive into the nitty-gritty. We have the INFJ. INFJs at their best, in their healthiest form, INFJs have a deep insight into human relationships and hitting meetings. Improving the lives of people is their priority, and they are very strategic about creating systems that will benefit others. In decisions, INFJs are very in touch with their values and what would be ethically correct and impact people positively. They see things from numerous perspectives and vantage points, which makes them open-minded and slow to judge others. To others, INFJs appear highly empathetic, idealistic, and deep. Now, INFJs at their worst. At their worst, INFJs can get stuck in an intuitive analysis, but fail to do anything productive with what they discover. They can be confusing to be around because they are unable to find an adequate way to express their intuitions. Instead of trying to find a clear way to express themselves, they become pretentious and believe they are superior to others. This leads them to becoming resentful of other people and feeling sorry for themselves for being so misunderstood. Another issue that unhealthy INFJs have is that they follow their vision so blindingly that they ignore facts and details that might be important. This can lead to them becoming increasingly impractical and single-minded. So if you're an INFJ or know someone who's an INFJ and struggle with the factors mentioned, then talk to them about it. Start working on it. The INFJ is a very loving personality type that has a lot to give, but if the individual isn't taking care of themselves, that can be turned around. And unfortunately, the individual can cause a lot more harm to a lot more people just because of not taking care of themselves. So they're becoming resentful of other people and feeling sorry for themselves for being so misunderstood is quite a common one I see amongst some INFJs I work with. The martyr complex of the woe is me, how dare this person do this to me? Does that sound familiar to any INFJ who's listening? And it mentions here that INFJs sometimes have trouble following their vision so blindly that they ignore the facts and details that might be of importance. So when you have ADHD and you're not taking care of yourself and you have these ideas and these visions, there's going to be a lot of the time where you're not going to have the clear view of something. You're going to be clouded in thought, basically. And your logical thoughts are going to be blinded. And you're going to want to do what you want to do simply because you want to feel good because of not being stimulated or having your neurochemistry helped, especially if you have ADHD and you're not getting the help, primarily. So if you do not help your condition out, sometimes having a vision and going through with it, regardless of the ramifications, is going to be so stimulating that as an INFJ, you're going to want to do it anyway. And that can cause a lot of harm to quite a bit of people. So we need to be careful with that. INFJs, regardless of the fact that they're introverts, they can sometimes be quite extroverted and like to be around and help a good amount of people. So if the INFJ isn't feeling all that good and is not doing good in life, they can become extremely manipulative. They can sometimes even become very passive-aggressive. And since their J function sometimes can be so rigid and so unbalanced, they can sometimes run the risk of screwing other people over in instances just to hide the fact that they themselves messed up, because they don't want other people to see the tremendous error or multiple errors that they have been doing. So, if you're an INFJ that is doing that you have ADHD, and you're causing other people to go through so much trouble, and you're screwing them over because you yourself are not taking care of yourself, that is extremely unfair. If you're in charge of a group of people and you're not taking care of yourself and you're being unfair to other people just so you don't look bad, that is very unethical, and you should really think twice of your actions. First and foremost, take care of your condition. Take care of your neurochemistry. Once you start taking care of that through supplement use, of which I have a video if you want to check out, and the link down below, it talks about neurotransmitters that people with ADHD have low levels of and the supplements that help them. Check that out. That can perhaps bring some help and some insight. Once you get your neurochemistry on check, then you're going to want to start working on the issues that you have, on the areas of difficulty that you have. Because unfortunately, regardless of the fact that an INFJ can be very loving and understanding, if they grow up with ADHD in a world where they receive a lot of negativity, yeah, that love and that understanding can become inverse in some ways. And then the individual can become quite manipulative for the wrong reasons too. So people are not objects of which you just can manipulate for your own pleasure or for you not to look bad. Take responsibility. As an INFJ, you have a lot of responsibility as a person because of your relation to people, and sometimes because of where you work. If you don't take care of yourself and you continue to do these things with people, you're being very unfair to yourself, and you're being unfair to those around you, particularly colleagues, your loved ones, friends, and family. Start taking care of yourself. Start looking for these things, these patterns that we spoke about in this video. If you feel you have trouble with them, if you, for instance, are not an INFJ and are dating someone who is an INFJ or are married to someone, talk to them about these things. A lot of times the ADHD kind of clouds our thoughts. We're not even aware that we're doing these things sometimes. Now, these characteristics are not common to every personality type, just like these characteristics are not all common to the INFJ personality type. But they're common enough that you see them when the INFJ works with you in therapy or in counseling. Now, these characteristics are not the end-all be-all, and they're not characteristics that every INFJ has, but they're common enough where we can safely say that they're frequent characteristics that are seen in INFJs that are at their worst. So if you're an INFJ, get off your high horse, and if you're having trouble accepting that you have ADHD, do some research. I have a bunch of other videos on ADHD. And if your J function is not balanced enough, go find another person with a J function, and go find another person with a J function that you do like that talks about ADHD, and learn about it through them. INFJs, big heart, want to do people a lot of good, but at the same time, if you don't take care of yourself first, if you don't take care of the home first, you're not going to be able to take care of the rest of the stuff you need to do. You take care of yourself, you're going to be able to work with people better. You're going to be able to go further in your career. You're going to be able to do and start things and continue with things that you need to do that you couldn't do before. It's going to take a lot of work and effort, but I definitely think it's possible. With the J function, you can definitely create a good regimen, or seek other people who have good regimens too that fit with your standards. And you can definitely change and turn your life around for the better. if you indeed want to, and if you indeed put the effort. So, I definitely believe an INFJ could. Going on now to the ESTP. At their best, ESTPs are good-natured, practical, and expert at seeing the needs of the moment. A hunger for adventure is always close to their heart, and rightly so, because they are quick on their feet and able to adapt to new and changing environments with speed. In decisions, they are analytical and rational, and pride themselves on keeping a level head. Their lifestyle is independent, and they have a fun, loving, gregarious nature that gives them magnetic, charming appeal. They balance a need for logical thought with a simultaneous desire to meet the needs of the people around them. Going on to ESTPs at their worst. Underdeveloped or unhealthy ESTPs run the risk of not seeing the forest for the trees. They become so focused on the current moment and the impulsive action they wish to take that they fail to consider the long-term implications of their decision. They may also become restless, pleasure seekers, always looking for the next thrill or the next challenge or risk to give them an adrenaline rush. One more time. They may also become restless pleasure seekers, always looking for the next thrill or the next challenge or risk to give them an adrenaline rush. Deadlines and structures are their enemy, and they will avoid committing to anything that might impede on their freedom in any way. Because of this, they can lose sight of their obligations and responsibilities and fail the people who need them. Occasionally, they can be tactless and inconsiderate with their words and decisions because they are unaware of the impact they have on others. So, if you are an ESTP, or you know someone who's an ESTP, start working on these issues. A lot of these issues are very common with ADHD in general. These symptoms, these actions that describe the ESTP at their worst seem really common with characteristics of ADHD, so I can only imagine how difficult it must be for some ESTPs who are not taking care of themselves and who are not taking care of the condition ADHD in this particular case. So if you are an ESTP and you weren't aware of these things, the sort of pleasure seeking, not connecting, not wanting to connect or start a plan, if it's not stimulating enough, flaking on people, making plans with family members or friends, and then just leaving them hanging because something funner came up. What happens is with people who have this personality type and ADHD that I've worked with is that there's an issue maintaining friendships and connections with certain family members because people can only take so much. Some ESTPs, when they're not doing good, can lash out verbally at people and just obliterate people with their words, or they can also run the risk of flaking on their friends or family members so many times that they eventually just stopped calling them. Or they run the risk of flaking on family member and friends so much that eventually both the family member or family members and friends stop calling the individual or stop inviting them to come to places because they don't think they're going to come through. They're going to think the ESTP is just going to flake. And if they arrive, they might be in a bad mood and they might say a couple of hurtful things to so-and-so. So when ADHD is present, notice that Impulse is also an issue, and impulsivity seems to be an issue with the ESTP personality type in general when they're not doing good. So issues with financial constraints, overspending, not knowing a limit, perhaps feeling really good in the moment, making plans, and then something else comes up that's more stimulating and more fun. It's like, oh, I'm just gonna go and do that. It can be very frustrating for those that work with the ESTP. So ESTPs understand you have to take care of yourself. You have responsibilities you have to meet, and you have your word that you have to keep. If you don't keep your word with people, people are going to lose respect for you. In the long run, that's not going to help you out. Financially, also, you're going to be putting yourself in debt if you're not taking care of the spending. And if you keep overspending and binge spending and spending based off impulse, and if you keep doing that frequently, there's going to be a lot of financial problems. And if you have a family and you're doing this, you owe it to yourself to work on yourself and stop putting your family through this. I cannot tell you the amount of families I've worked with that have gone through a lot of trouble due to financial troubles because either one or two ESTPs are the parents. It can be very tough. I had two close friends growing up in my life who were ESTPs. They're great people, big heart, love to have a lot of fun, but when ADHD is present, they have trouble sticking to their word. If you're an ESTP, and if any of these things sound familiar, like things you need to work on, get them moving. Start working on it. You can't say that you're not aware now. If you weren't aware before, you certainly are now after hearing this. So, get to work. ESTPs are great people. I really like their vibe sometimes. Sometimes I think they can be a little much. I need to watch out what they say, but they got a good heart. And if you guys notice, I'm pretty much saying this about a good amount of personality types because, we're all unique in our different ways. And, I'm just a person over here on YouTube talking to you guys about this. So take it with a grain of salt. I'm just trying to help out. And I believe that if every personality type, if people get the help that they need and can resolve the trauma and stuff that they've been through, I honestly believe the individual, especially the individual who's had a lot of trouble in their life, can turn their life around and really, really bring a lot of positive things, not only to themselves, but those around them as well. So, ESTPs, you guys definitely fall into that category. So, get the help that you need. Going on now to the ISTP. Healthy developed ISTPs are extremely observant, logical, and objective. They can quickly get to the root of a problem and solve it with startling accuracy and efficiency. They're very practical, realistic, and concrete in their outlook on life, and know how to get out of a crisis with a combination of quick wit and fast reflexes. When it comes to dealing with people, they are private, open-minded, and friendly. They tend to be goal-oriented and independently driven. Now, ISTPs at their worst. Undeveloped or unhealthy ISTPs can be cynical, negative, and self-absorbed. They will attempt to block any attempts at closeness and will avoid commitment to an excessive degree, to the point where they are unwilling to go out of their way for anyone else. When they work with people, they might be completely negligent of how their decisions will impact them, or how their words might emotionally harm them. They can become short-sighted, so focus on immediate results that they lose sight of long-term implications. So, with having ADHD, this can definitely complicate things. And particularly if inattentive ADHD is involved, there can sometimes be issues with remembering things, issues with sticking to plans, with coming through. When you got to come through sometimes with some ideas or some plans you got with people, or promises you probably made to a significant other, a family member, and things of that nature. So, since it's a logical type, since there's a T over here, if you are an ISTP or know someone who is an ISTP, sometimes when we're not feeling good, I'm pretty sure it feels pretty easy to just lash out or call out a mistake someone made, or when someone upsets you for whatever reason, and it's like kind of like, why do they logically do that? So if you are an ISTP or know someone who is an ISTP, talk to them about that. Make them aware about these things. If you're an ISTP, become aware about these things. Become aware that you can sometimes be a little rough on other people. And sometimes with little provocation or little reason to. It's just simply that you're not doing too well. So, a few ISTPs I've worked with have trouble sometimes taking good care of themselves. So, if we neglect the necessities, whether it's hygiene, whether it's eating and stuff of that nature, life can become very hard, particularly if we're not eating or sleeping right and we have ADHD. So, if we're not doing those things, if we're not taking care of ourselves, then yeah, these things are going to start to pop up. We're going to start to be intense. We're going to start to be a little mean sometimes. And we're not going to go out of our way for anybody else. And it might make us come off as selfish when in reality it's just that we're not taking care of ourselves. And if we're not taking care of ourselves and not taking care of our ADHD, well, that gives double the problem here. So I got a lot of respect for ISTPs just because I've had a lot of ISTP friends, and some of my close friends are ISTPs, so I know how they can kind of get when they're not doing all that good. And have a good heart, at least the ones I've worked with. And they have good intentions. It's just that when they're not feeling too good, they can kind of come off as someone who is a flake, who can be moody sometimes, who can be very disagreeable, and someone who can nitpick and just point out errors sometimes. Or to some people, an ISTP might come off as really, really conceited or show-offy about the knowledge that they know about certain things, but kind of comes with the territory. So if these are things that you weren't aware of, if you were an ISTP, or if you find that you're dating an ISTP, or married to one, or have a friend who's an ISTP, perhaps this is something to talk to them about, or something to look out for, just to help them out. So the easier life becomes when we start working on the issues that we got, whether it be trauma related, RSD related, and particular in this case, ADHD related. So, if you are an ISTP who has ADHD and see yourself going through these things, then it's time when you get the chance to start working on it and keep working on it. These negative habits that we build, they're really hard to break over time, especially if we've been doing them for such a long time. So, we can definitely improve upon that. Every personality can improve upon a little something. We can keep on going. So, can an ISTP improve themselves? Absolutely. Going on now to the ESTJ. At their best, ESTJs are excellent decision makers, combining logic and efficiency into an unstoppable force of productivity. They are organized, analytical, decisive, clear, and assertive. They are usually friendly, matter of fact, and realistic. They live by a clear set of rules, principles, and standards and don't ask anything of others they wouldn't do themselves. They love working with others to achieve a goal and as a result are excellent leaders. So, we look at the ESTJ at their worst. At their worst, ESTJs can jump to conclusions too quickly, and oftentimes their judgments will reveal previously formed biases. They can be rigid and dogmatic, appearing as know-it-alls, and refusing to listen to other perspectives or viewpoints. They can become extremely nitpicky about details and will be impatient with people who don't immediately fall in line with their plan of action. They often lose sight of the big picture and the long-term effects of their decisions. They can also be tactless and careless with the feelings of other people and may humiliate them by calling them out over perceived flaws. Let me repeat that. And may humiliate them by calling them out over perceived flaws. When they are criticized or experiencing extreme stress, they may develop a martyr complex and become unusually reclusive. So, the ESTJ is a very disciplined personality type that likes efficiency and that likes very J-like things of planning, structuring, and doing. So, unfortunately, to a lot of other personality types, the ESTJ can come off as very, very anal. So, anyway, ESTJs, you gotta understand that the world and majority of other personality types do not view stuff the way you do. So when you're feeling bad, if you're going to go out and just make other people feel bad that are working with you because they're not doing the system that you're working with, you don't need to give people a hard time if they can't do those things. Everybody learns different, and with the different conditions and types of ADHD that some of us have, it makes it even harder. So if I'm speaking to somebody here who's an ESTJ and any of these things sound familiar, it's time to start working on that. You don't want to let what your personality type at your worst is like dominate who you are. You're going to push a lot of people away, and you're going to lose a lot of opportunities to help out a lot of people who can otherwise be helped by your personality characteristics if you were in better shape mentally. So as an ESTJ, you can really do a lot of good to a lot of people in terms of helping them with that discipline regimen that a lot of ESTJs got and that attention to detail. It can be really helpful when you're working with other people. So get yourself at your best so you can give your best to those that you're working with and not make them feel harsh. And this can be clients, friends, family members. So if you push off your family, your friends, and your clientele, there's only so much people can take. Not everyone is as disciplined as an ESTJ. So understand that balance is required. It's not going to be the end of the world if you make a certain plan as a J to do something at a certain time. And if it doesn't happen, it's not the end of the world. You can do it a different day. It's okay. What happens is, the more rigid the J, the more unbalanced that letter J, the more rigid the individual will be. And how does that J become more rigid? Well, it comes from our upbringing, from our family and schooling. If we grow up in an environment where structure and timing and scheduling is really rigid and strong, and then if the kid in the family gets verbally assaulted or beat or whatever it is, unfortunately, some parents are really strict that they do beat their kids if they don't do something by a certain time. I'm sure a lot of people here hearing this have gone through that. So what happens is the J becomes really rigid. The individual becomes like that, and it brings along that trauma to the rest of the people the individual is working with, especially if an ESTJ, which is mentioned in the description, is commonly a leader. So what happens is, if this ESTJ is not doing too good in their life and is pretty stressed out, they're going to start lashing out at perhaps their employees or those who work with them, or, unfortunately, even their own family members. So what you got to do, you got to keep yourself on check. You need to create a regimen to keep yourself on check and make sure that you're improving on what you need to be improving on. A lot of stuff online. Use your logic and utilize the best sort of strategy or regimen to be able to call yourself out when you're entering that negative zone. So whether it be because of trauma or RSD or both, get yourself the help that you need. And if you need supplemental advice or supplemental help, like I've said before, there's a video I made about that. Because our neurochemistry being affected and being lower in many instances for multiple neurotransmitters causes us to sometimes be jerks to other people. Because if we feel horrible and bad on the inside, we are going to project that outwardly in some sort of way. So, as a person, you got to take responsibility to help yourself first before you go out and work with other people or before you interact with certain people. Some people are really vulnerable, and the rigidness and intensity an ESTJ at their worst can do to somebody, you can cause a lot of trauma, and you can even trigger a lot of RSD in other people if you keep that rigid structure. I'm going to disclose, I've definitely had my own stuff triggered, my RSD and stuff triggered when I was younger from ESTJ instructors who didn't understand that I couldn't do stuff as fast as my other classmates. Not because I was slower, but because I had inattentive ADHD. And it was undiagnosed, and I was not doing anything to treat it. Understand that different people got different scenarios and different problems. If you expect everyone to be just like you, that's a really rigid view of life. You have to become intuitive. You have to balance out the sensing type with intuition. Understand that every person is unique in their own way. Every person has their own struggle and their own path that they're going through. And if your struggle and path as an ESTJ is a troubled one, work on yourself. It's also okay to sometimes to just relax. You don't always need to be doing something regimen-oriented or discipline-oriented. Sometimes it's just nice to just relax and give yourself a pat on the back. If you're the type of ESTJ that never gives yourself credit for anything, do it. Take it as a homework assignment. I'm not your teacher, but I dare you. Give yourself a pat on the back when you do something good, especially if it's something different from the usual. So if you're a person that's really structured, schedule-oriented, loosen that up a little bit sometimes. It's okay. Believe me, it'll help you out in the long run because not everyone is a J. There's a lot of perceivers, as we'll find out.